Everybody, welcome to Temple Bar, which is the smallest and the newest of all the livery halls in the City of London. And we're very proud that after a refurb this summer, we kicked off on the 10th of October. And we now have a monthly programme of talks. We have educational activities, and we're open for venue hires if anyone should be interested. So I am delighted to welcome to our, what one of our speakers already dubbed the St Paul's Speakeasy. I'm delighted to welcome Jason Bruges to our Speakeasy. And he's going to be talking about his work under the heading of Media Art in the City, Aspirations and Approaches. So back in the day, approaching the millennium, when I was working, and I still am working very actively as a curator and a writer, I got really fascinated by an emerging genre, a hybrid genre of architecture, interactive architecture, and I was really fascinated by its multiple dimensions and applications using high, low and medium technology, hacking technology as well, with great dexterity and style. And this kind of increasingly, this liquid medium, because light was at the centre of all the works that I could see, had this capacity to build relationships with participants rather than solely regarding audiences as spectators alone. So as part of this exciting journey, I encountered Jason and his work. So I wrote an essay, Jason Bruges, Light and Space Explorer, in an early bookazine that I produced. And then I wove, the V&A came to me and said, we want you to write what turned out to be Responsive Environments, Art, Architecture and Design, published in 2006. And it was intended to create a kind of easy to read, digestible guide to this incredibly exciting emerging phenomenon that the layman could understand. And Jason's work ended up being woven into multiple chapters. So it was his work, this was the very early years before he was just setting up his practice, and we're now celebrating this autumn 20 years of Jason Bruges Studio. So whether it was interactive walls for a hotel or for the TV studio, TV channel 5, or interactive exhibition for Amnesty Human Rights Action Centre, chandelier for a hospital, or beautiful kinetic light installations for the most desolate Raynham Marshes in Essex, desolate post-industrial wasteland. His work remains very much in this book as one of the key inspirations. And I just want to quote you very briefly before we kick off with Jason. He will stand by this statement today, where he said, I'm keen to hijack structures used for architecture and use them for art. My compositions are not complete without the interaction of an individual. Each person experiencing one of my works will have their own unique memory of it. So we're really excited to hear Jason convey some of his passions, his interests, and he's going to provide lots of insights into the concepts, the processes, and the challenges that the studio's faced in all those years since then. And the practice is riding high today, which shows what a resilient approach he's applied professionally and creatively. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what he's going to say, and I'll take a seat here. Over to you.
Thank you, Lucy, and thanks everyone for coming to listen. It's been quite a journey, and the studio's, we're celebrating our 20th year this year, and I've been practicing in London for the last 20 years. We had our first studio in Rotherhithe, in Rotherhithe Street, on the Thames, where it was just me, assistant, an accountant, and a couple of students. And today there's 27 of us in the studio. There's a few studio members here as well. Thanks for coming. And actually, I thought the studio. This is one of. We've got 3 spaces in London Fields, so this is one of them. We're a sort of very multidisciplinary team. So without them, none of this work would happen. I've got a very talented team of people that kind of split between sort of creative disciplines and technical disciplines. So it's very much sort of like applied creative technology. My background, I trained as an architect. So I spent 5 years training as an architect. I worked as an architect in Hong Kong and London before working at Imagination, looking at sort of experiences. Back in 2001, started to apply my architectural thinking and my kind of interactive architectural thinking to sort of art commissions. And the work sort of splits probably in the studio now between commissions that are very much led by the studio, myself and the team, and work where we get briefs, because people kind of look at the kind of work and are interested to see what it could do for different sorts of environments. So sometimes we're commissioned by brands or people that have got a certain kind of agenda for a space. So that first one, this was part of an exhibition called Decode at the V&A, which was exploring digital art, digital processes, and we were commissioned to create a piece for the John Majeski garden in the central courtyard. And this piece lived in the pond there for 9 months. It was very much looking at the idea of narcissism within sort of digital systems, and the fact people like looking at themselves, and these were like little mirrors submerged in the water. And this piece came out of a conversation with the design director of Aston Martin, who wanted to create a space where these 77 Aston Martins were picked up by individuals, and this was the reveal. This was the kind of silk sheet being drawn off the car and being revealed to each owner in their factory in Gaydon, Warwickshire. But very much, for me, this was kind of trying to solve a problem, create a solution. So less of a kind of an experiment, less led by myself or the studio, but more was kind of like a brief. And so tonight I'm going to show you some small projects, some intimate projects, very intimate, like this room, which is very lovely, and some larger projects. And so this, I was thinking, well, what's probably the smallest thing we've done in London, and I think probably this might be it. And this was a commission from the Great Britain campaign, and they were set up, if you don't know, they were set up in 2012, I think mainly for the Olympics, to celebrate British creativity and innovation. And this was a conversation about where can we create an intervention that we can film and create something that can celebrate Britishness. And I didn't quite believe when it was suggested to me that I could use the door itself at number 10 Downing Street. So this is actually us installing a door that looked, all intents and purposes, like the door at number 10, but could come to life. And as Lisa was describing, the kind of work very often has a fourth dimension. It comes to life, it interacts with people. And this was an idea of a door that you could see through, something that would almost have like a layer of active camouflage within it. And here's a little movie of this project, the real door being taken away and our intervention being installed, made in collaboration with a wood craftsman. You'll see Sean Sutcliffe from Benchmark there. We collaborated with him. The door was made by the same tulip wood the actual door's made from, but it's just got this kind of digital layer inside it. And basically it has sensors that pick up the movement of things behind it and bring it through. There's Larry. And so this is a very small project, but very much just in response to that space. And the everything we picked up, from the kind of slightly slanted zero, the sort of slightly strange door furniture. It has a joint down the middle, which looks like it might have opened in the centre. And this is a piece that now sits in the Government Art Collection. So it's a very unusual project, and very small media artwork in the city. And then I suppose going up a scale, this was a commission from the late Irvine Seller to create an intervention on the top of the Shard. And it was a conversation, it was to create a beacon, it was to create almost like an advert, a kind of something very prominent that would advertise, obviously, or celebrate the coming of 2015. So, yeah, 7-8 years ago. And it was quite interesting. It was a process where the conversation started earlier in the year, and we were talking about creating this temporary intervention, both in the roof space at the top of the Shard and also in where the 2015 is, there was sort of unused apartments. So we thought, well, we could actually create this media surface in this unused space. And I thought I'd just dig out today just some of our behind the scenes shots, which we never really shared, but I thought they were quite interesting. This is just us in the space, exploring where we could put media within the temporary media. So we put 9 trucks worth of equipment into the roofscape of the Shard. And this is just us on site looking at where we could put things, and quite amazing views actually out of these spaces. I get slight vertigo, so walking around up there and climbing up to the very top, bar the last 5 stories where you just clip on and you're going up tiny ladders. So what we were trying to do was create this sort of theatre in the sky, really, and each pixel that you're seeing in just the number was one of these light beamers projecting out from one of these unused apartments, and we had this sort of like control room, which was pretty amazing, really, looking out across London. We had a series of quite big searchlights that generated a sort of 3-dimensional space that was adjacent to the roofscape, and this is us aligning them so they're actually out of sync there. Trying to make sure our work was not obstructing the aircraft lights. And it was one of the first projects where we built, I suppose now, what you'd call a digital twin. So because we had such a short time to understand how the work would appear on the Shard top, we built a model which replicated how it would work and tested everything that we were going to run on this, because we had a very, very small window of time to check anything actually on the Shard itself, because we didn't want to give the game away. Quite a simple, really. I mean, there was a countdown and there was a performance every evening within the roofscape itself, which was filled with mist. So it became a volumetric display. We actually filled that space so that it was misted. Now, one thing that came with this project that was really, really interesting was how people interacted with it. Because obviously it was visible from up to 30 kilometres away in every direction. So very, very visible project. And it was the first time we actually had a project where we were talking to our audience through social media. So it was the first time we were asked questions. And some people, admittedly, there were some people complaining about what we were doing. You know, you're shining a light into my flat in Greenwich. Could you point the light somewhere else? But, you know, we were very polite, said, sorry, that's one more minute, and then we're not going to do that, run that sequence again. But it's the first project where we'd actually had this sort of live conversation with our audience via social media, so via Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, which was kind of really interesting, the first time that happened. And also, actually, it was our most photographed work ever. I think just in terms of, I think kind of professional photographers and people that we could look up. And you had the view from the Shard space there. We had no jurisdiction over that. So this is actually quite an atypical project, so I'm going to jump into something a bit more ordinary. So this project really looked at, it was a commission from Westfield, and it was part of their agreement with Newham as they were developing the Westfield site as the sort of Olympic site was being finished in Stratford. And we were asked to look at a sort of a network of artworks that would animate the public space. And we were really interested in the sort of network of waterways, the river and the canalised version of the kind of River Lee. And very much thinking about water features and how they sort of generate space and how they generate a kind of hierarchy of space, how they link to each other. But obviously we started really thinking about how we might digitise water or create a digital version of it. It did mean that we were actually sketching with water in the studio, so this was actually a jet of water which we were exploring. We were doing some early 3D scans. This is in 2010, 2011. So we were kind of scanning the water, so that was the sort of surface of water, and building up a structure that we could pour a sort of metaphor for a fountain down. And this was a extruded triangular sculpture with basically addressing the three sides of the space. And it was part of that sort of Chestnut Plaza area leading down into the Olympic Park itself. And hopefully that plays. Yeah, here we go. So the digital fountain was a part of a series of pieces. It's the one that remains. The others were taken out for the Olympics because they cleared out all the spaces. And it's a generative system that's continually generating new patterns. And it's a faceted liquid crystal. So it's liquid crystal shutters. So the colour change you're seeing is generated by electrical current being played across each of the pixels you see. And the idea was to try and create an ever-changing surface that looked like kind of water kind of flowing down it essentially. And the colour is the panel behind the liquid crystal. And there's a soundscape as well. Now, what's interesting about these pieces, and we're always thinking very carefully about, people are thinking about sort of media artworks, is obviously how do you look after them. And I don't think this piece is still running. It's had sort of no maintenance in 11 years. So we're quite pleased about that. It probably could do a little bit. It's and people, one of the things we're doing more and more is looking at the kind of obviously the life cycles of all the components we're using because of the use of technology, and we're looking at sort of design life of up to 20 years. We think the liquid crystal components could last up to 100 years, and it uses 60 watts of power, so it's sort of quite low power usage. So, and the colour itself is coming from reflected light, no light coming from the object itself. That's sort of quite representative of kind of some of the work that the studio is doing at the moment. Now, this next piece I want to talk about is in Toronto, and it's very much came from looking at the city and all the work. We kind of spend a lot of time analysing the city and the space around it. And I was looking, I was at the top of the CN Tower, look at the environment around, and the site is just off camera here actually, but I was really looking at the kind of shadows and how they sort of changed the city and thinking about could we create an artwork that responds to the amount of light or shadow in a space. So started to develop a type of artwork that would respond to having a shadow cast upon it. And this is in our old studio, but you can sort of see that the artwork is, it's a sensitive surface, so as you walk past it, the quality of the light passing on that surface changes. That's sort of a close-up of the palette, the technology that allows this to work. This is the Torontonian granite that's been water jet cut as the surface of the artwork, and this is it sort of coming to life. So both in the daytime and the nighttime, it creates a sort of living visual echo of what's happening around it. Now, So it's able to do that because every pixel within it basically is a sensor, is something that's both picking up light and emitting light simultaneously. And again, all of these projects, I'm kind of really interested to sort of see how they're bedded in and how they're working. And this is in a pocket park in downtown Toronto on Front Street West. And again, this is very much part of the embedded system in North America. It's 1% for art. So every project they have to commission artists to engage with the public realm. And there's a version of this actually we've created a little bit closer to home. This is for Quintain in Wembley Park. So this runs under the royal route, which is the route obviously taken by the royal family in the 1920s to access Wembley for the first time. And it's a rather, well, it was a sort of dark, damp, slightly antisocial space, and we've created this sort of living, breathing space where you sort of create this idea of a living audience that sort of watches you while you're in there. And the patterns and the silhouettes are formed by these infrared shadows that are bathed onto the wall. So this is, Wembley Park. And what we kind of really like is how people have adopted it. So for me, pieces if they can get invigorated by the audience, and we pick up their pictures from Instagram about how they used it, or how activity happening, choreographed, but not by us. So, talking of choreography, I'm going to tell you a little bit about this project in Hull. This was commissioned as part of the UK City of Culture, and we were asked to look at a 2 by 2 square kilometre of the city, the old medieval city of Hull, and we developed a series of performative artworks that were looking at the history of how the shipping guilds developed technology for communication using light. And this was developed very much about in the same way, looking at how light was used as communication. And we used that to develop a type of choreography. And we had 4 spaces, and we had a cast of 25 industrial robots to move light around these different urban spaces. So this is a little excerpt from that. And it sort of shows, I suppose, how varied media architecture and media art is within cities. I presented this at the Media Architecture Biennale in Beijing 4 years ago, where we kind of won an award for our sort of spatial media architecture. And obviously more and more people are exploring how to kind of animate, curate and choreograph our spaces. So this was in one of the main squares outside Hull Minster, where we were using a series of these machines or performers to sort of animate the space. And it was seen as a sort of non-linear performance where you can sort of dip in and out of the space and explore that. It's both a soundscape with directional sound and a sound texture, but also with these kind of moving lights moving through the space. And it was conceived in a way that it would work with the everyday passerby, the everyday Hallensian walking through that space, or a kind of visitor or a kind of tourist to the town, and make people look at the kind of city in a new way. So this was performed for 5 weeks when Hull was UK City of Culture in 2016-17. This is in the museum quarter. And so one of the challenges, I suppose, that we started to explore here is really the sort of use of a new type of, I suppose, technology or palette within that environment. Obviously, you were using machines and technology that are usually destined for the factory floor or for manufacturing. And what happens when that is translated to the public realm? So even at this point in time, we're sort of starting to think about how can we sign off even this kind of work? How can we create something that is safe for public consumption as well as being kind of interesting to look at? And these are upcycled pieces of technology. So this instance, these are 12-year-old robot arms. So the way that we're driving them, the way they're animated, was completely invented by the studio. So back in 2000, I'm trying to get the year right, 2019, we saw a competition being advertised by the Tokyo Metropolitan Government for a festival that was running in Tokyo alongside the Olympics and the Paralympics for a series of creative interventions to run literally alongside the Rugby World Cup, the Olympics and Paralympics, and we described a robotic performance that would be inspired by the performances of the athletes and the Olympians and Paralympians. And this is the sketch we sent to them, and obviously we sent the credentials of the work we've done in Hull and described this idea of creating a performance that would be very much a homage to the Zen garden, the rock garden, tended by the monks, where they're creating these kind of wonderful landscapes, but where the monks themselves or the gardeners are replaced, and these robots are exploring textures and choreographies and movements in response to the athletes. And we described processes of us kind of extracting movement and choreography from the athletes in different ways. We rendered how this would look. We tested the techniques we were going to use in the studio. So all of the projects to sort of enable for us to sort of visualize and think about how they're going to work with prototyping them in the studio. So this is us purely actually looking at aggregate and gravel and how the robots would make marks within it. And the kind of size of the gravel, the colour of the gravel, the angle of repose, which is the slant you get when you kind of actually leave a mark, was all really important, right down to how do you wipe it clean afterwards, or how do you create different sorts of textures. And I will show you a little bit about what this looks like. So this is, Ueno Park, downtown Tokyo. This ran from the start of the Olympics through to the end of the Paralympics in September. And it was quite a challenge creating this work obviously we were in a pandemic, but also there was a state of emergency in Tokyo. And we were sort of quite worried really about kind of my team, we were all on diplomatic visas essentially. The 7 of us, we found out the day before when we were actually travelling, the robots and our entire infrastructure had been shipped 7-8 weeks previous. And we wondered how the kind of audience would feel about us coming to Japan to show this work. And I think people were genuinely interested and pretty pleased to have something to do at a time when most things weren't happening. Obviously this was in the open air. and it was within a space that was deemed somewhere people could go. And this was open every day to the general public to come look and walk through. And we entertained 2,000 to 3,000 people a day just walking past and actually kind of looking at this piece. And it celebrated the achievements of athletes on a kind of daily basis, whether we were being inspired by different Olympians. This is Yui Ohashi swimming, one of her golds, and obviously that resonated with the local audience. And we were finding different ways of extracting information and movements from the broadcast feeds that we were actually seeing. And then that was then the next day created a performance. And we had a series of kiosks which explained the kind of process we were going through to build the performance and how it was working. But yeah, a kind of interesting process, and a project where the whole thing pretty much materialised. I mean, shipping it from the UK was not our intention. We wanted to build it all in Japan. But everything went back into the individual ecosystem. So the staging system went back to the production company. The robots we leased, and they came from a BMW factory and have gone back in. I don't know where they've gone since. The gravel has gone into a whole series of Tokyo Gardens, but the whole thing has just been recycled.
So how long was it going for?
It was from the Olympics to the Paralympics, so it was like 2.5 months. It was running from mid-July to into September, sorry. So we were there for about 4 or 5 weeks, and we onboarded a whole Japanese team to invigilate, and also, it was quite an extraordinary process. We had, on site, we had 7 people from the UK to help build it, but we were building on site through simultaneous translation all the time, because we could obviously have a much bigger team of local craftsmen, fabricators and installers. It was worth being in quarantine to see that. Show this project. So this is a commission from Culture Mile, so from the City of London. And Culture Mile is made up of the LSO, Guildhall, Barbican Art Centre, Museum of London, and they were kind of interested in, were given this space, the Beechwood Tunnel, as a space to sort of create an experiment or pilot in. In fact, before we actually installed the piece of work, Banksy had already had a go opposite and created a couple of interventions on the junction opposite. And it's just a really interesting space, and the idea being, which hasn't happened fully, that the road would be kind of shut to vehicles that were non-electric. And we're very kind of obviously interested in the textures of the Barbican and also the tens of thousands of people that actually kind of jackhammered the concrete to make that texture. And it's very amazing seeing the sample wall behind one of the loading docks of all the different aggregates and concretes. But we're starting to think of a media surface that could actually be textured in the same way. So we were exploring the idea of these machines that could travel along the tunnel and create these sort of live tapestries or textured surfaces. So we were given the green light to carry on with this prototype. So we were sort of exploring in the studio these sort of machines that could travel over physical pixels to sort of generate textures. And also starting to explore the idea of actually sort of just breaking down the surface that existed there, so using the colours that are there already. What I quite liked about this whole process is potentially developing something that we could And this machine could come in and actually kind of work its way across the surface all the way through the tunnel, and you only got one digital device that then is sort of kind of intervening and changing the space that's there. And we developed these kind of pixels that would spin round. And that's a drawing of one of the panels. And the machine that drives across the surface. Again. And we're starting to build, this is, so more and more with our project, this is a sort of more up-to-date, I suppose, digital twin that allows us to sort of see the environment and understand how it will work and what it will look like, and was pretty useful for people like the highways engineers and other people that are using the road who are kind of like, potentially curious to sort of see what effect something might have on a space. But equally, what was quite important was the ability to go into that model and walk around and see how that might react to you. So this is a view within a sort of VR display, so you can sort of see how the artwork's responding to you prior to us setting it up, so pushing data into the VR model. And a machine in situ. Now, what's difficult about doing this sort of thing? Obviously, there's lots of moving parts. I think the thing that we underestimated, probably about Beach Street Tunnel, was the amount of brake dust. So everything got coated in quite a thick coating of brake dust, even though, and which would carry on actually, even if more and more electric vehicles, there'll be less airborne pollution from obviously the exhaust and emissions, but the brake dust is still a massive problem. And I'd say anyone building, obviously anything adjacent to a kind of roadway, it really is this sort of brake dust that causes problems, and this is us sort of commissioning it. But this piece was in situ for 18 months, and I think we kind of learned a lot about building something in that sort of environment. But it was a sort of very, very interesting process. Any questions before I pause for a second?
What did you do with it when it was at the end of the commission?
So we've got lots of physical pixels in boxes in our warehouse at the moment. So, I mean, they are a bit dusty, but they're certainly looking for a home for them. But it was they were. I mean, it's all in aluminium, so we can recycle everything and melt it down, but we're ideally looking for another project for it. And again, it's very much about thinking about what the process is for these projects.
Jason, can I ask how many of your projects do you have to bid for funding or win a competition to do, and how many are commissions where people have sought you out?
My team here. Where there are projects, where there's a building or a project underway, there's obviously funding potentially or an idea to commission something. Sometimes you might get a phone call because someone has got something quite particular in mind, or they'd like to work with you. Other times that's an invited competition. So it's a sort of sliding scale really. I'd say completely open competitions, we're probably going for about 30% potentially. But phone calls where someone says we'd like to commission you to do something, probably 25% of the work. I don't know. It's sort of sliding scale, and obviously we collaborate with lots of people who are working in the built environment, from architects, engineers, landscape architects, different sorts of agencies, developers, city makers, place makers. So there's lots of conversations that come through those sort of conduits, those conversations. I'm just sort of thinking about, show you a couple of examples. So, for example, something like this piece. So this piece in Cambridge, we just finished, called Latent Facade, for Tuss Park, who run science parks, for Trinity College, Cambridge Science Park. This piece, I think, was advertised. So it was advertised as an artwork for this development, and it was part of their Section 106. And we submitted a letter of interest, and we were invited to develop some ideas.
You work with artists, or you are the artist?
We are the artist, yeah. I mean, we're in this weird world where, we are a very kind of new type of artist, I suppose, in that kind of environment, but yes.
How do you choose scales and things? So the last one, how did you choose the pixel size?
It's a lot to do with, a lot of our work, we work quite low resolutions, but it's only because we don't need particularly high resolutions to sort of create patterns and sort of tell the stories that we're doing. So it kind of varies. I mean, this piece, there was a silver halide that was used to fix images that, by Mott, who set up the park, and that influenced our choice of using some hexagons within the canvas. So there was a certain scale we were working with immediately, but we start to look at the context and like how far away is this being seen. So immediately, like that pixel on the shard, we had 2 per story, so there was 2 pixels every 4 meters. So a 2 meter pitch, but that starts to resolve at a very short distance, and you can work out exactly what that distance is. So people think, I need an incredibly high resolution thing so people can see it, but you don't, because distance will, and your eyes will take that into account, and the physics of it means that quite a low resolution, large pitch media surface will resolve at a certain distance. So this project, so this was a result of a competition, and we developed two canvases on 2 sides of this multi-storey car park. This is a Section 106 agreement with the developer, with Cambridge Council, and this was developed as a result of consultation with people in the science park. So there's 100 companies or startups within the science park, a lot of them using machine vision, computer vision, AI, other kinds of techniques. So we started to use what we could see from the building as a way of developing these patterns. So we have a whole series of systems we're using sort of to develop patterns based on different things that the cameras see.
So are these pre-programmed sequences, they're not responsive?
They are responsive to what
They
the
are.
cameras see,
Ah.
So they're completely generative, but they are running through different types of techniques. So like a flow field technique is a way of analysing an image and picking up movement through it. Like a Boyd system, again, is another way of tracking movement within sets of pixels. An L system is a way of using mathematics to grow certain patterns and forms. So we're sort of experimenting with different ways. But what we do here, though, when there's downtime, there's nothing happening, the building, the artwork dreams and it develops its own patterns based on what it can see. So in that sort of context, obviously went through a sort of competitive process. This piece we've just finished. So this is in King's Cross for DeepMind. So this piece hangs in the lobby of DeepMind, and we were invited by AHMM to meet the sort of founders of DeepMind to talk about creating something for the lobby. So in that context, it is a conversation, and it's I think there was just an interest of us kind of collaborating. We spent 18 months working with coders at DeepMind to build an AI that runs this artwork. So this artwork self-curates. So we've got a network of cameras that film anonymously in that space, they created a live heat map. And this piece is developing the patterns it has within it based on what it thinks going on in the space. And again, we're testing different modes in this space, but with the brain, the way it's thinking and working was developed in collaboration with us and a series of researchers at DeepMind. So this, you can, if you come out of Coal Drops Yard at King's Cross, and you've got crossover Handyside Street, that's just on your left, and you can sort of see, and it's semi-public space. I'm not sure how far you'll get in the door, but you can see it from outside. But that's a sort of permanent piece, and it's a piece that describes some of the sort of processes that go into them developing the technology they're trying to develop, and they are really under pressure to kind of change how people view what they're doing and understand what they're doing. Because obviously artwork's thinking for themselves and developing their own kind of content, and all the other things you can do with that technology is obviously could be concerning if it's in the wrong hands or people don't understand what they're trying to do with it. And this piece was we built this and put this together in the studio during the pandemic. So this was very much crafted. So each of these 3D circuit boards is 1 pixel, and they're woven onto this brass chassis, and all the power and the data goes down through the brass chassis to kind of singularly illuminate 3,000 of these cubes. And it's incredibly minimal. There's nothing to it. It doesn't need to be there. And it's what we call a voxel, so it's a sort of volumetric pixel display, essentially. Yeah.
Who's the artist in that one?
Who's that? Well, that is a very good question. We have an agent called Agatha, which runs the AI. So they are running that AI within the artwork. I mean, there's a lot of kind of framework. I mean, it's a collaboration between us, DeepMind, and Agatha, I would say. But the future might be scary. But I mean, we are very much at the moment exploring sort of new media, and I might just finish with this piece. I might have to come out of here. Give me 2 seconds. So let's look at this one. This was a project. The media is water. And this is for a space in Dubai. It's the Museum of the Future. This was one of the experiments in the studio. Play the video and then just tell you about it afterwards. So this museum is very much about posing questions, I suppose, about the future. Set up by the Dubai Future Foundation, and we're commissioned to create a piece that's the last thing you see as you travel through this museum. And I've been sort of thinking quite a lot about sort of building work that uses sort of water as its sort of main medium. And this piece, brief, was sort of like self-transcendence, so the idea of kind of being sort of very reflective or meditative. This piece uses a 3-meter diameter water lens, which we agitate using actuators, which develop these ripples. And in turn, we project through it to create this immersive space within the 8-meter dome, and also within a kind of this space is like an amphitheatre. So the idea idea is there's no right or wrong way of experiencing it. But I think, I mean, we're in the studio myself, I'm sort of fascinated about we're pushing into new forms of media that are perhaps more actually traditional in a way, but it's this sort of juxtaposition of technology and more natural forms of media. So yeah, leave that with you to think about.
Do you collaborate with different musicians or do you do the sound as well?
We do collaborate with, it's probably one of the only sort of skills we don't have in-house is composers and sound designers. So we collaborated with a sound designer called Daniel Solibend on that project. And yeah, it was very much, we had a kind of quite a strong idea of what we're going to try and create with the piece, but because there were very particular frequencies that were creating the kind of story that was evolving in that piece, it was really kind of interesting to bring a sound designer on board that could sort of use the kind of idea. I mean, it started with somatics, i.e. kind of the translation of vibrations into sort of visual artifacts in the first place. So sort of using the idea of certain frequencies creating certain sounds, which seemed like a nice starting point, but then some of the sounds that were very pleasing to look at were not so nice to listen to. So there was a sort of, a poetry there we had to explore. But it was very much about creating this immersive space. The piece was designed to be generative, so it was like watching a body of water, so that you would never see kind of repeating patterns. It's very much, there's still a story arc there, you'd still have high points, but at the same time, again, it's this very non-linear thing. You could be there for 3 minutes or 40 minutes, and you would see something very different.
The technology is extraordinary and it's quite amazing, but I'm interested in the people behind that because it doesn't make itself. So what's the sort of profile of your team and how do you have connections with the university? Brilliant team, I have to say, well done. Do you have a university that you have connections with? How does it all kind of work? Where do your level of people come from?
I mean, the team is amazing and they're very multidisciplinary. We have, it started off quite architectural as a team, as it was being developed. But then very quickly, obviously the sort of technological aspect. So there are coders in the team, creating software. There are computational designers that are using code to develop the work. There are people that specialise in visualising the work, so sort of predetermining what it's going to look like. I got to a point quite quickly in the evolution of the studio where I realised that if you've got 1,000 objects in a piece you're creating and they're doing something quite particular, and it's not something you bought off the shelf that was warranted by someone, you're essentially designing for manufacturer. You're creating a product. So then I started to realise we needed product designers, design engineers on the team, which we do have. We have quite a few different sorts of engineers. We have electronic engineers, structural engineers. We have people also with hybrid skills. So people that are kind of scientists that are interested in art. We have people that were performers that help with running the studio. We have people that are designers who help running the studio. We have people that have mixed skills as well. So in this sort of team, there's a sort of sometimes I think it's like sort of conducting an orchestra. There's people with very specialist skills, and they're not quite as well defined as that because I think the skills overlap. And we work in a way, everyone is involved in every project. So, without all the skills in the studio, the projects wouldn't happen because the specialisms are all really important. I'm a bit like a conductor, I'm a sort of creative director. Some of the ideas come from me, some of the ideas come from the team. Obviously, it's kind of the philosophies I built up and the ideas I built up sort of do feed back into the process without self-plagiarising, but sort of.
Yeah.
And we obviously, with people in the team that do research, with people in the team that teach, and all of that, obviously, you meet wonderful people, and obviously there are people that you think, oh, they could be a great part of the team. So, but we're always happy to talk and teach and share what we do, because obviously sometimes that's come back to you, or other times it's just part of sharing what you do, and I'm a big believer in that as well.
Jake? Oh, sorry, is there someone
Another
behind
question,
me?
if I may.
I shall sit here and help you chair your questions.
Fascinating to see the work, which is clearly very ideas driven. How do you cost it? And how do you say I've got this amazing idea for the future final exhibition? How much is the budget for it?
The thing is, I've built over 300 projects, so I can have an idea of what something costs without having to work too hard. However, to check it and test it, there is work involved, and especially at the moment when costs are going up, and also when we're working in new places where we're not sure of what the rules are or regulations are, that's where it takes a lot more work. But intuitively, we're able to say this feels like this level of sort of investment is required, or level amount of time required. Time is probably harder actually to kind of estimate. Again, just because it's quite a fluid process, there are unknowns. We are doing research and development in the project, which is essentially first in class. So we're doing things that haven't been done before. So yeah, that does, and we will try and choose what projects we're going to do, open-ended research versus things that are quite locked down.
You don't have an in-house ballet dancing contest there.
We have an in-house ballet dancing new business person, but not a quantity surveyor. It's probably quite good at actually knowing roughly what things cost as well. But I think where we sort of start talking to QSs and things will be when we are really embedded into things that we probably don't do so often. So like if we're embedding something into a landscape, large scale, there'll be all sorts of prelims and groundworks and things that we don't know much about. The thing that sits on top of all that, yes, we could tell you, but the costs that are the other 300,000% that sits under the ground, we'll go, we don't know about that. So yeah, where interfaces with a bigger thing, that's where or it's somewhere unusual, or the procurement process is to be kind of convoluted because it's going through various people, then we're going like, yeah, then I do the kind of, if we were building this in London tomorrow, it'd be this, but it's happening 5 years' time in Seoul, I can't tell you because I don't know some of the local peculiarities. So that's quite often how we circumnavigate what could it be, or might it be. But yeah, no, it's how much it costs, and then maintenance and how we look after the work is a really big question. And for me, and we don't get it right all the time, but it is one of my biggest bugbears is work that isn't working. And it happens to all of us some of the time, and it's like we spend an awful lot of time prototyping and testing, and also being on hand to go and fix things that aren't working.
You don't have a maintenance team?
We kind of do have a few people that spend more time doing maintenance than other things, also logistics and installs. But yeah, it's just, that's a conversation I want to have with people, and some work we have that's incredibly robust and doesn't need much. It's obvious where there are projects where we're more adventurous, or there's kind of electromechanical things are obviously going to need much, it's pretty obvious the sorts of things that are going to need more input. Robots are pretty robust actually, but it's generally the bits in between.
Do any of your projects go on like a cycle around the world? Do they go to like different exhibitions or?
We have had a few. I mean, we're starting to do a bit more temporary work that's been exhibited, but not very much. I would say 80% of our work is permanent, commissioned, so it sort of doesn't, once it's there. But then we do get into this interesting, because now the studio's been going 20 years, we're getting to this sort of thing where work is getting decommissioned and trying to be at the right place at the right time to get the work off at the end of its life, so you can decommission it properly or reuse it or do things with it. And it's not, that's kind of challenging now, is they're starting to think about how do you do that. And within artistic contracts, we're sort of thinking that, well, there must be a way of making sure we can catch work if and when it's decommissioned.
I'm sure sustainability must be quite a challenge for you as well.
I mean,
It's got to be built in, hasn't it, that?
Yeah, I mean, I've never sort of overtly said that we are following best practice, but we have largely followed best practice. But we are obviously working with some materials that don't really fall into the kind of easy to do with, scarce materials and materials that potentially aren't quite so nice for the environment. So we are thinking very carefully and sort of analysing that. Having said that, one thing that we're working more and more projects that sort of tell environmental stories. We've got a media facade that's running permanently on Sea Containers House, which talks about the health of the Thames, for example. So very much, most of the work is referencing or talking about natural systems, and that kind of was really where my interest started, really, pre-art, pre-architecture was sort of a natural world, so it sort of very much points back to that most of the time.
I think that your work is very much a second nature, actually. I think it's a very unique blend of art and science. I mean, I love the fact that it's so bespoke and so site-specific. Every single work is so distinctly different from the next. It's like it's grown rather than, it's like it's organically grown in that space. And now, obviously, with you, you've got AI as a driver. It's thinking back over the years to the early days when you clearly didn't do digital twins as part of the prototyping and the piloting process. At what point did the digital twin activity come into the work?
Well, I think obviously the project, the Shard project was where because we realised that
It's too important not to.
We had to build it,
trick, yeah.
And the exact code that ran that piece ran the final thing. So they were kind of absolutely. I run both movies side by side, the digital twin running and the Shard, and they're just absolutely identical. And again, actually, I think it has been temporary pieces. This piece actually, this was in 2016. We built this piece completely digitally because we only had 5 days in York Minster. This was sort of exploring the idea of sort of a light architecture moving dynamically in the nave of York Minster, and so this was pre-built in a digital system, which was identical to the space, because we're nowhere knowing or having the time to set it up. So these quick temporary pieces where you've got more time in the digital world to test and prototype and look at it, but all the parameters need to be exactly the same. And again, I've got film where you can sort of see it on the computer screen and you can see it in real life, and the two mirror each other. But you couldn't prototype was the organist playing the Arvo part arrangement that we created to mirror it. But so this was probably number one actually. So this was an immersive experiential piece for a lighting festival. digital twin one, probably I'd say. And then more recently, this piece in Seoul, this digital tree that's in this atrium that you go up through on an escalator. The pandemic really created the necessity for this. This is very much like a tree, you go through it. It's like a canopy. We link into a weather system that drives how the leaves ripple and how it's animated and the texture and all that sort of thing. But I'm not seeing this yet. So it's like, how did I see this and how do I understand what it looked like? And this piece is largely using a sort of data set that comes from this live. In fact, the last time I saw it, it looked like this. So it was a small prototype. And this was in 2019. And then, so in 2020, we pretty much built, this is in Unity, so this is what the sort of digital twin looks like. Every facet, every leaf of that tree sits in this system. And we have data plugged into it that's doing exactly the same thing to this that it will do to the real thing. And you can just literally just point the data towards the sculpture rather than the digital twin that does exactly the same thing. And that's built in a games engine. So I mean, it's because it renders in real time, it takes its data. So yeah, that's probably the last sort of major digital twin we built. Concert Gardeners in Tokyo, we built one. I mean, now we pretty much, I don't think there's any projects we're not building a digital version of them. And at the moment, it's purely for our own kind of curiosity and for developing pieces of work. But obviously you could go, well, what else do you do with that? And we are thinking about, well, you could expand an audience of a piece potentially. But that's perhaps the next stage, is working out how do those talk to each other, and how do people experience that as well as the real thing in a world perhaps where people are travelling less potentially.
Well, it's such a rich herb that you've got. It's tempting. We could go on. I feel we could go on all night exploring more projects that you've got in your PowerPoint. But we've got some drinks. We've got some drinks. So let's
one last question from internal in-house.
Yeah.
In-house. I know you've done so many amazing projects. Do you still have a dream project that you would want to do, or a dream site that you would like to get hold of and thought, actually, that would be amazing to do that project?
Dream projects. My view on this one is changing. I'm kind of had been talking about, wouldn't it be great to do something in another world? But I think we need to concentrate on projects in this world. So that's where my view on that has changed recently. So I've got to rethink that one, because it was all very much about work, being seduced by the idea of creating interplanetary work, but thinking about I think I need to rethink. So, half an answer.
Well, it's a very pragmatic and yet very somehow alluding to the capacity of your team to create these metaphysical artworks, which are just incredible. It's like you've rewritten the rules of architecture in a media sense, in a way that's very true to people's psychologies and desires and physical movements and so on.
Great.